It is a great honor and a privilege to introduce Professor Emeritus David Guttmann. We're here in Haifa at the university, and David, thank you so much. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate this. So if you could tell us a little bit about your amazing life and your incredible journey.
Well, thanks very much for coming, visiting me, and I will be happy to participate in this interview. So I will make my life story short, because I wrote 5 books about my life, 5 books, my autobiography, because I lived such a life that very few people, I believe, had the kind of life I lived. So I was born in a small city in Hungary, where my parents, my father, he was a baker and a conditor, and we had a bakery and a conditorry, but it was taken during the 1930s, when they were anti-Jewish laws introduced in Hungary, and he had to sell his business, and we moved to Budapest.
Which town were you born in?
It was called Dévavanya. It's a small city somewhere on the plains of Hungary, and it was a traditional Jewish home. My mother came from Austria, from Eisenstadt, where she was from a rabbinical family, and she studied there too. And I was born in 1932, so that's on May 1st, which is also interesting because it was once so a major holiday in the whole world. And so we had to move into Budapest. My father was one of 11 brothers and 2 sisters, and none of them survived the Holocaust. But one of the son, later he immigrated to Canada and became in Montreal, became very rich man there. And so, but let's go back step by step. We moved to Budapest. We were poor, really poor, lived in a poor neighborhood. I couldn't go to a Jewish school because we had no money. And so I studied in a regular state school. And I studied only until my 6th grade. I didn't finish even 6 elementary school years, because by the end of, in the middle of March, in fact, the German army came and invaded Budapest, and then started the Holocaust of the Jews.
This was in 44?
In 44, right, yes. So, but so in 1944, you know very well that the Jews were collected and they sent to Auschwitz. Auschwitz was prepared by the Nazis to include the Jews and to kill them there, of course. And about 600,000 of the Jews of Hungary had perished there. We were put in the Budapest ghetto, which was erected in October, and I stayed there until January 19, when Budapest, this part of Budapest was liberated by the Red Army. In fact, I can tell you in my story that I think I am the only one whose life was saved by two soldiers of the opposing forces. My life in the ghetto was saved by a German SS. Because when I was in the ghetto, every day, earlier in the morning, my older sister, she is no longer here, but I was 12 years old, we went with a little pen to get some food, not food, soup. And sometimes, if you were lucky, you got even a piece of bread too. And there in the courtyard of the great Jewish synagogue in Budapest, you see there's a great temple. So, when I came back from the courtyard without any food, on the way back home, meaning in the ghetto, where we were 3 families in one room, no heat, no running water, nothing, in the winter. And I saw a carrot lying in the ditch, and I tried to pick up the carrot, and I felt in my back the rifle of a German soldier. And so I looked up to him, and what could I do? I smiled at him, and this smile saved my life. The German soldier, who knows for what reason, but he saw a little Jewish boy, blue eyes, blonde hair, smiling at him. I smiled out of I couldn't help it, you see. It was my reaction of this in the situation. And I smiled back, and he said, okay. So I could take the carrot. It was a treasure, you know what, a carrot? A real carrot. And so I left slowly the place, waited for the shot, because I knew that he will shoot me. And but no, he let me go, and he didn't shoot. This was one of the second happened also in the ghetto of Budapest, at the end really of the ghetto, when after heavy bombardment, there was a knock on the door in the what do you say, in the bunker where we were staying there, huddled together, all the families. And after everybody was frozen, really, nobody dared to move. And the soldier came in holding his machine gun and started to say, Niemiecki, kaput. And so nobody moved, nobody dared to say one word. And I, on my last strength, I crawled over to him with outstretched arms, and the soldier, he had a side bag, and he put his hand in the bag and took out a large piece of black bread, and he gave it to me. And this piece of bread literally saved us our lives. My mother was with me and my 2 sisters. So you see, 2 soldiers of the opposing forces, each one let me live.
And David, also, when they took your father away,
yes,
I think he sent bread. That's only...
Well, when my father was taken away, he was taken to forced labor like Jews. He was then he was 45 years old, so he had to go. And but once he was able to send us a beautiful challah, big one. One of the somehow somebody got out of the forced labor unit, and my father, he was a baker in the same unit. He was baking bread for the people, and he brought us home. I remember, it's unbelievable, beautiful, big one. So this was my last memory of him in terms of taking care of his family, even in that situation. So when the war was over and hunger, yeah.
David, can I just mention, there was another miracle.
Yes.
When you went to the glass house.
Yes, well, look.
And your sister cried, and then you.
Now this was a different. When you see, when we were in the ghetto, the Red Cross, Karl Lutz, this is why I say he's such a great man. They organized a group of people who would collect the children, to save at least the children, they would say. And my mother finally agreed that they can take my little sister and me to this safe house. This is called safe house. And my older sister, she remained with her in the ghetto. And then we were taken to this safe house, and where we were after who knows how many months of real hunger, we were given bed, real bed, and even some soup and bread. But in the middle of the night, my little sister started to cry, and she said to me that I want to go home, meaning the ghetto. But the ghetto was about 4 or 5 kilometers from the place where we were taken, on the other side of the Danube River, you know, which is a huge river. And she cried and cried and cried, and I said, well, okay, I agree, let's go back. I had a bad feeling about that place. I didn't like it at all. So we got up in the middle of the night. It was minus 20 degrees Celsius. It was terrible cold, really. And we managed to sneak by the guard at the door, get out in this horrible cold, and we started to go back to the ghetto. I didn't know how I did it. Truly, I tell you, I had a sense of orientation. Only I knew we have to go this way until we get to the bridge, and then across the bridge, and then it will lead us to the ghetto, which was really what we did. So we went all the way back, crossed the bridge, crawled on the bridge. There was only one bridge standing still. The rest, they were destroyed, because every night the Americans and the Russians too, they were bombarding the city from above. So we crawled and we came back. And when I got to the gate of the ghetto, the guard there, he said to me, "Are you crazy to going back to the ghetto? You must be completely crazy." And I said, "Yes, I go back. I want to go back to my mother." And we went back and stayed with my mother and my sister until the Russians liberated us, I told you, with a piece of bread. After the war, there was still a great deal of hunger all over Europe, not just for us. My older sister and me, we went to look for work, and we found work. In a grocery store, the owner said, "You will do all these things, you see, clean the place, make everything in order, whatever I tell you, you will do it. And in return, each day of work, he will give us a little piece of bread, and sometimes maybe a piece of vegetable, something." This was our the compensation. Anyway, after a few months, again some people came to organize the Jewish children, surviving Jewish children, into Zionist groups.
But David, can I just mention?
Yes.
I think you found out later that if you would have stayed in the glass house.
Yes, I don't. I much later, but I learned that what we were again, as if someone above had decided to leave us alive, because they found out that they took everybody to the Danube and shot them.
So if your sister wouldn't have cried and you wouldn't have gone to your mother,
exactly, I wouldn't be.
You would be here.
No.
And it's...
So this is what happened, and afterward a Jewish Zionist group was called the Gornonia Maccabi Hatzair, and they organized the children, and they started to teach us about Zionism, about Eretz Israel, about Hebrew songs and Hebrew dances and everything else which you see for children. They were real happy. And then they said the purpose is to get to Eretz Israel. And for us, Eretz Israel was always very important. My mother especially, you see, she led her life, always remained and ate kosher only in the ghetto. I mean, not only in the ghetto, but only once she didn't keep kosher. It was when after the liberation people were hungry and there were dead horses lying on the streets, and we went, I tell you, my older sister and me, we cut a piece of meat and she cooked it in some water, and we forcibly let my mother eat because she would die of hunger. Yes. Anyway, but this is part of our lives. And in 1945, after the war was finally over, at least in Europe, in December we left Hungary on a train. Only my little sister and me. My mother stayed behind. They didn't want to take the parents. They said first we save the children. And my older sister went with a different group a few months earlier. And we started our journey to Israel, which lasted from December 8, 1945 until July in 1947 with the Exodus, and then back to Germany again, and then from Germany, from the camp in Pöppendorf, and then later on to Bergen-Belsen, you see, finally were sent to Genoa in Italy, and from there, when finally to Israel. I arrived 1 month before the State of Israel was declared in April. And so
David, could you tell us a little bit about the Exodus? Because it is something...
Well, I can tell you, my special meeting with the captain when we arrived in Sète in France. You see, they were taken, the people on long convoys of trucks, which was by the Jewish brigade, they were led. And when we went up to the ship, it was like in the concentration camp, you see, 3 bunks, and I didn't like the idea of staying down. And so I went up to the top deck with one of my friends who was already gone, and then I met the captain. He was a wonderful, small Jewish boy, looked like like a youngster with the captain head, and he said to me, "What are you doing here?" And I told him, well, I wanted to see the view from here, and he said, "Tell me, can you read in Hebrew?" I said, "What a question, of course I can read." He took out from his pocket here a little Bible, a little Tanakh, and he said, "Well, then show me." And he gave me, opened up at Bereshit, so I said, "Bereshit, bara again." "Oh," he said, "well, you speak very well, so I mean, you read very well." We learned on the way home, on the way, on the 3 years of getting to Israel. And he asked me, "Can you also write in Hebrew?" I said, "Yes, I can write in printed letters, I can write in written letters." And he said, "No, I want you to write printed Hebrew letters, and I said, what should I write? He said, well, you will write the sign of the ship. And on this top deck, they put up a long canvas, white, and he gave me some black paint and a brush. And the first I said, I have to draw all the letters, you see. You can see, you see, and I draw the letters. And once, you see, these were done, then I painted them.
So you painted the sign on the Exodus?
Yes. Exodus 1947, Haganah ship.
And that became the iconic Exodus.
Yes, of course. Well, you see, Aronovich, Ike, he was the captain of this ship of the Exodus. Yeah. And so life, and later we have a friend, she is Aronovich, she's from the same family.
Was your sister on the ship with you?
My little sister, yes, she was with me. Yes.
And do you remember coming into Haifa and the British?
We came, you see, after the whole story is the fight with the British Navy at night, close to the port and on international waters. But anyway, they conquered the ship, took us prisoners, and we entered the port of Haifa, and there they transferred all 4,500 people who were on the Exodus, pushed together like sardines. We were really, actually, truly, because I mean, the bunks, 3 stories high, each one had one person. So of the 4,500 people, they took 1,500 people for each prisoner ship. The British had 3 prisoner ships waiting for us. And we were put on the ship. It is called Ocean Vigor. This was the ship, the strike him. And the whole journey of this ship from port to port, and we stayed all the way back to Hamburg. Can you imagine, after all this, what we went through in the war, the ghetto and the Nazis? And anyway, so the British, they were very cruel, really, really. Imagine to take refugees all the way back from, and where? To Germany, not to France. The French offered us citizenship, but we refused. We said we shall not leave the ship. We have to be in Israel. This is our place, the only country in the world where we belong. Oh, they took us to Hamburg, and they hit us, the British soldiers, Navy personnel. They were forcing us from the bottom of the ship, where we were staying on the iron floor without anything, you see. So from one situation to the next, the ghetto, the British ship, we were forced out of the prisoner ship and to trains. The trains had the windows with barbed wire covered.
So you were put back onto trains with barbed wire?
Yes, barbed wire, and this is where they took us to a concentration camp. It was called Pöppendorf. And from Pöppendorf, later, when finally our time came to come to Israel with a certificate, you see, you couldn't enter Israel without a certificate. Finally, we got the certificate. It was already 1948. Then they transferred us to Bergen-Belsen. And I stayed in Bergen-Belsen, and I don't have to tell you what Bergen-Belsen was. Even after the war, it was still a horrible place. From there, they took us, the Jewish brigade, by trucks again all the way down to Italy.
I think you have a picture behind you. This
I
is,
want you to see, this is in Pöppendorf. I am here behind barbed wire, you see. And this was my friend, Aaron Chefigal was his name. We were interviewed by the same woman who became famous, the one who managed to follow the whole story of the Exodus and filmed it. And she wrote a big article, you see. Now, later I used this photo to write a book in which every one of the surviving members of my group, we were about, we left Hungary 300, but there we were less than half when we were in Bergen-Belsen. And then I asked them to each one to write his story of survival on one page. And here is the book, Michali. Okay, let her, she's tired. So, here. You see, here. This is called Hayetziah L'Chaim.
and this is the picture.
This is the picture of in Pöppendorf in the British concentration camp.
It's so insensitive to take you back to Germany and to take you to...
and put in a concentration camp too. Yes, British. You see, and here inside everyone. Here, this is this one, my friend, and later on when he was an older person. But here I can show you here. Let's see. Here. I'll leave it. Here is my sister. My sister. Okay.
Vera.
Vera. And then later when she, as a woman.
And where is Vera today?
Today she's in the cemetery in Aliya.
And your older sister as well?
My older sister, oh yes, my older sister was here. Here, my older sister, she married her youth leader and she had 3 children.
And David, did your mother come as well?
Oh yes, my mother, she was left behind in Hungary in 1945. Okay. But she managed to get out of Hungary and she came to the DP camp, displaced person DP camp. We were reunited on the Exodus. She was with me on the Exodus, and then she was also with us in Pöppendorf. But again, when we were sent to Bergen-Belsen for Aliyah, okay, they left again. The older people, they left behind. She was staying in Germany in the DP camp until 1949. Then she came to Israel finally, and she joined my older sister in a kibbutz, where I also lived at the time.
So you were separated for a long time?
Oh yes, we were separated.
And how was when you met each other again? It must have been very emotional, the meeting.
Well, it was, can you imagine, after such a long time, and...
Well, to go through such a trauma after having gone through the Shoah in Budapest, and then to be sent to other concentration camps, to be sent to Bergen-Belsen.
Yeah, well, this is my life, part of my life. This is why I say I wrote about it 5 books, because each one is a separate, almost like a separate person living a separate life. because one is my childhood, and including all the way until I came to Israel officially with a certificate. When we arrived, we didn't come to Haifa, we came to Tel Aviv. The ship that I came, Italian ship, it was a cruise ship, and in fact it's also part of the story. This ship had ports to call. We like a tourist ship, but we were not real tourists. And we were also in Alexandria in Egypt. Can you imagine in March 1948, when we was already at the beginning of the War of Independence, you see, 1 month before the British mandate ended, and in Alexandria and the harbor, the Egyptians, they wanted all the Jews to leave the ship to stay with them, prisoners. And the Italian captain, he was a brave man, I can tell you. I remember his figure still, he was fat, and you see, he said very bravely, he said, no, nobody takes anyone out of my ship, this is Italy. It was an Italian ship, Italy. No one has a right to come to take any of the passengers. Everybody is under the protection of the Italian government, and we stayed there for 3 days. There were negotiations between the Egyptians and the Italians until the Egyptians gave in, and we could sail from Alexandria. We wanted to come to Haifa, but the ship stopped in Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv has no port really, so we had to disembark the Italian ship on small boats, and that was the way we came to a port, to the shore. And I can tell you this too. When I arrived, I kneeled and kissed the so let's make it shorter. Anyway, in Israel, they took us with a bus, and the bus took us to what is today called Ra'anana. Ra'anana today is a very good place, but in Ra'anana there were only orchards, oranges, nothing else. It was a camp for newcomers, and we stayed in the tents for about 6 weeks, and we ate only oranges. There was nothing else. Orange and halwa, halwa. This was the whole. They really had no food for us. Anyway, so after all this, we were sent each one to a different kibbutz. So I was sent with my sister to Ramat David. But Ramat David, as were 2 kibbutzim together. She stayed in Hasharon and I stayed in Ayanot, and the 2 kibbutzim became together and under the name of Ramat David. And then, you see, started life in Israel. I was like a youth. We had to study and we had to work. I worked half a day and supposedly studied, and she was in a host family, and she could study in school. So I stayed in that kibbutz for almost 10 years. And since I was what is called a bachelor, I was only 16, and I stayed in a bunker at the end of the edge of the kibbutz. It was a real bunker. This was so from the tent I became elevated to the bunker for 3 years, and all the time I never gave up the dream of my own, and my mother's dream was that I became a learned man. She said always, always, that I have just one wish. I don't want you to be rich and famous. I don't want you to be a lawyer or a doctor. I just don't be an Am Haaretz. That's all. So I became an Am Haaretz with a professor. So, but in any case, my wish to study, I was given the job of being a youth leader in the kibbutz for new olim, for children from the Arab states who came then in 1940, 1950, in the early 50s. And so I was a youth leader, and then I wanted to go to study. I wanted to study, really, to be a teacher, and the kibbutz didn't let me. And I said, if you don't let me, then I leave, and I left the kibbutz. And I went to Jerusalem, to the seminary where in Moshava Germanit, and I told the director of the seminary, look, I left the kibbutz, I have no money, but I want to study. And if you permit me to stay and study here, okay, I will do any kind of work that you give me in return for the fee, right? And he said, fine, I accept you. It was only for people who were in a kibbutz. See, I was the only one who was not a member anymore. I was an ex-kibbutznik. And so I became in charge of cleaning the kitchen on weekends and on working the garden. It has a lovely garden at the time. And this is the way I survived the 2 years of my studying for a teacher's certificate, which I got. But when I completed this, I went to Chabad Hanova Tzioni, as you know, and I worked with young children until the time came to go to the university. And I went to the Hebrew University. It was the beginning of social work in Israel under university auspices. And I told the director the same story. I have no money, but I want to study, and I am ready to do any kind of work, just, so. And she was Professor Salzberger. I don't know, she was a famous lady. She's a survivor also from Holland, and she heard my story, and later I learned her story, and she said, no, you will get a special stipend. And that's the way I studied in Jerusalem and completed my first degree, Bachelor of Social Work. Yes. So no, but this is just part of the story, and I don't. Later in 1967, and I was in the Shirion, in the Panzer unit, stationed on the Golan Heights, and I had to serve until the middle of September. I was taken to the army in April in 1967, went through the 6 Days War and all the rest, and then put us up on the front line on the Golan Heights against the Syrians. You had to hold the lines. You never knew if they want to counterattack. And I had already in my pocket a letter of invitation to be a shaliach in America, in the city of Savannah, Georgia. And so I said to the commander, look, I was invited, they are waiting for me. Oh, they let me go in the middle of September only. Okay, and then I was married at the time, my one child, and so we left on a ship, on a real ship. It was a Shalom, and we went. Took 3 weeks to get to America, and then another week or two, and after New York, down to Savannah, Georgia, and then I served as a shaliach. I was called a shaliach, a cultural emissary of the State of Israel. And I made a special arrangement that when I finish my shlichut, then I will be given freedom to study further, because I said I want to make my second degree, to be a Master of Social Work. At the time in Israel, in the School of Social Work, most of the teachers didn't have doctorates. Everybody who had a master's degree was looked upon like a big hero. So anyway, so they let me stay, and I was sent to Baltimore, to the University of Maryland, for my master's degree. And look, life, you never know what can happen. When I completed my studies and got my degree, then the president of the university there was a great man called Daniel Turs. I don't know if you heard about Dr. Daniel Turs. And he said to me, at the end of the ceremony, he said, "Now, David, you go right away for your doctorate." And I had again no money. I had my wife with one child, no, 2 children already, and it was in 1969 when I completed, and I said, how can I study for doctorate? He said, don't worry, you just go and tell them that I sent you. And I went to the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., and this is where I studied for my doctorate, and got my doctorate in 1974, because I studied in Maryland from 69 to 71, and in 3 years I got my doctorate, and right away I was appointed assistant dean for academic affairs in Catholic University, Jew. You see? Okay. And I was later in 1978, after 4 years I became an associate professor, and then in 1982 I came to Haifa as a guest professor for 2 years, and they wanted me to stay. I had to return because I made a commitment in America to complete 3 more years of work. Then I would be free to go anywhere. And then in 1987 I became the dean of the School of Social Work here in Haifa. And I served here 5 years as dean, and then 2 years I went to Hungary, back to Budapest, and I worked as a volunteer with the Joint, because the Joint saved our lives, in fact, because they provided food and clothing. And so I paid back my dues, and then I once went back once again for another year of my sabbatical in Budapest, also as a volunteer for the Joint for another year. So I made 3 years volunteering work for the Joint. And the rest, as we say, you see, is written in the book of whatever, in my book of life. Yes, I was here, I became a professor, and in 1984, this is, and I stop a little, I can tell you, in 1984, I was on my way back to America for my 3 more years to work as agreed. And there was a conference on logotherapy in San Francisco. And this was the place where I met Victor Frankl. And this, you must hear it, because such things never happen. Who knows? Like in a story. I waited until he finished his lecture. And then back, you see, I was shy. And when everybody left, just he and his wife and I, we remained. And I got up all my strength, and I went to him and I told him, look, I am from Israel and I bring you peace, shalom from Jerusalem. And when he saw me and I said, you say I'm from, his eyes lit up. It was really unbelievable. And he said, are you from Eretz? And I said, yes, I am from Eretz Israel. And I came here all the way from Haifa to hear you, to meet you. And we became friends, instant friends. Can you imagine, like falling in love? It's you can't explain it. And not just with him, but with the wife too, is a wonderful woman. And we became friends all the time until his death, and I am still friend of his widow all the years. He died in 1997. It is now 26 years. But our friendship was a unique friendship, because I visited him many times. When I was stationed in Hungary as a volunteer for the Joint, I visited him, and later on also I visited every time in conferences too. And we would walk together at the university there and talking about different matters. He loved to hear stories of the Hasidim, which I love too, and so I told him stories, he told me jokes. I made a vow to myself that I will spread his teachings all over the world. And first thing was that I asked the Senate here, the Academic Senate, to grant him an honorary doctorate, which they did in 1988. In 1988, it was a wonderful ceremony, and we stood in Jerusalem. I took him to Jerusalem, visiting the wall, and he had his second bar mitzvah there in the synagogue in the wall. The rabbi was a wonderful old rabbi. And after this, we just continued to be friends until his death. I can't tell you more about, we wrote each other and we spoke. And what was it? Yes, in 2000 I was 68 years old. The university has a policy of retirement at 68. So before the retirement, I spent one last year in Hungary for the Joint, and there he was still around. He died in 1997. So.
And David, he had a profound influence on you, on
yes,
on the meaning of life, and you wrote a book.
Yes, and in fact, I don't know if I have it here. he wrote the foreword. It is in Hebrew. I had it also in English, so if you wanted English, דברי הקדמה, את Victor Frankl here. Do you read Hebrew? You sure read?
You have it in English as well?
Yes, let me bring you the, yeah, here is דברי הקדמה. Yes, logotherapy for the helping professional.
David, this is amazing. Logotherapy for the health.
בואי נוציא גם את השניים האחרים. פה יש, לא זה לא, זה אחר כך, זה פה בכלל, פה, פה, לא,
And here's the forward.
האם אכלת את הרכבת? מתחת לכחול.
זה, פון בלמין.
לא, בעברית.
Oh, David, this is amazing. Can I ask you a favor? Can you read the
yes.
forward that Victor Frankl wrote?
Yeah. Well, he wrote, you see, he didn't like to write like this kind of forewords, but he said with the publication of this book, the author breaks new ground in the application of logotherapy. New ground, the important consequences of which cannot be yet predicted, not by me, anyone, since I do not regard myself as visionary enough to foresee as many possibilities. Yet this does not prevent me from recommending David Guttmann's work without hesitation or reservation, for as I see him, he is an absolutely reliable person, both as a human being and as a scientific worker.
It's wonderful.
It is a wonderful.
It's really wonderful. And
yeah.
coming from Victor Frankl.
Victor Frankl, yes, Victor Frankl.
And David, you've given many seminars and many talks all over the world.
All over the world.
Including
my other book, which I wrote, he wasn't alive by then. It was this one, Finding Meaning in Life. Wisdom and Spirit from Logotherapy.
Yeah.
And you've given talks in South Africa as well?
Oh yes, let me tell you about South Africa, since I tell you, life is always full of surprises. After 1984, after our historic meeting, I was later sent by the Catholic University to South America, to Chile, to teach there at the Catholic University in Santiago. And I was there sent 5 times. And once I was sent also to Argentina, to Buenos Aires, to set up a branch of the university there, but it didn't materialize. The nuns, they didn't want to have any new school, and in the okay, I taught there human behavior in the social environment and ethics. And then later on I taught in many places, like in Mexico and Peru. And so anyway, what matters for me is that everywhere where I went, see, I could speak as a personal friend of Victor Frankl, because very few people were real friends of him.
and not just him, but his wife too. So it was a unique friendship. And I was sent to South Africa in 1987, and to Durban. There was a big conference about human rights, and so I went to Durban, South Africa, and then I was invited to Johannesburg also, to a Jewish family, and I spoke in a conference. This was Sandra Brave's family, and her husband Barney, a nice person. So I returned to South Africa a year later to Cape Town also. So, but in Johannesburg, yes, no, in Johannesburg, I wonder if it was in Cape Town or in Johannesburg, and it doesn't matter. But I met Rabbi Cohen. Do you know him, perhaps, in South Africa? Yes.
Rabbi Cohen.
Cohen. Yeah. Not Cohen, W-V. And he invited me to a conference about Judaism and civilization, to be the speaker, one of the speakers. But so he hosted me, or in fact he put me into a Hasidic family's home. They were my host, which for me was a little strange, but anyway, we went to visit his father. He was the deputy king, like, of sort. He was really governor of South Africa by the British Crown, his father. And he was the rabbi, he was the head of the Jewish community but this was in Melbourne, in Australia, not in South Africa. In South Africa, I had in Joburg, once I spoke there in a hospital, which was very strange. They used the lunch break to organize all the sisters and the doctors, and I gave them a speech about logotherapy.
And it was well attended?
Well, everybody, yes. I'm well attended. You know, the whole corridor was full of people listening to, you see. But and I want to speak about this Rabbi Cohen, who was the son of the governor. Australia is part of the Commonwealth, but at that time I think that they were still under the British Crown in some way, so he was like a representative of the king. And this rabbi, he had a strange relationship with his father. On the one hand, he respected him, on the other hand, he was defiant. So anyway, it was a kind of strange situation, but he took me to see him in his palace. He had a real palace, like a king has.
And this is in Australia, in Melbourne?
In Melbourne, yes, in Melbourne. And so it was a very strange way of how they spoke to each other, and so anyway, but I had an incident I can tell you. My host there, she was of course in the kahina of Rabbi Cohen, and I once was in the kitchen talking with her when she offered me a cup of tea, which I accepted, and then I took a sip and put it on the table, and all of a sudden she started screaming, "Gewalt, Gewalt!" I said, what did I wrong? He said, "Oh, but you put it on the end, you know, where it is the milk cake." I mean, I said, and she said, no, I have to run right away to the rabbi, ask him if it's okay that you put a cup in the part of the table where it was supposed to be only for milk or for, so anyway, I mean, this was a kind of strange thing for me. And there was a seminary for students, rabbinical seminary, and I met some of them, and they wanted very much to hear me speaking about ethics and about logotherapy, but the rabbi didn't permit.
It's a pity, because it's finding meaning, it's finding...
Yeah, but you see, it's a question of how you perceive religion. Anyway, this was one of those episodes in my life. But and then later on, I traveled all over the world. I was invited to many places. And everywhere where I went, I said, I speak about the logotherapy of Victor Frankl, because, you know, there were kinds of people who sometimes imitated, sometimes wrote against him. I said, no, the authentic one, which I perceive as authentic one.
And David, you did something very, very, very special. When you were in Dachau,
yeah,
you wrote a...
Well, this was another one of those occasions, you see. It was Dachau, we were in 2015, נכון? בדachau היינו 2015. Yeah, yes, it was 70 years for its liberation, and I was invited to speak about my special friendship with Victor Frankl. And it was done in the city, a small city, Dachau. Dachau is a city, and next to the city is the camp, right?
It's right next to Munich. It's
close. But Dachau itself, we were on the top of the hill, and there was a palace of sort where the conference was held, and we went down from there to the camp. And in the camp, I read a chapter from Psalms, you see, which I knew that Victor loved. And it was translated by his granddaughter from Hebrew to German. And we went also to a little church. They set up a church there also, and I also read another chapter from Psalms, so for them to know. And yeah, it was one of those experiences. And what can I tell you? I have a friend about my age, or maybe a little older. He's also a professor of social work. We had similar lives. He is from Romania, and he became a teacher and youth leader in one of the kibbutzim in Israel back in the early days, and when I was at the same time, amazingly, it's in Sde Nahum. Sde Nahum is on the way to Beit Shan, and we met in America. We met in 1981. And in 1981 there was a White House conference on aging. In America I used to have once in 10 years, which is the government arranges it, conference on aging, to see in 10 years what are the new studies and new developments about understanding aging. And I was by then quite well recognized as a gerontologist and as a investigator of old age, and the White House appointed me to run 2 mini conferences in preparation for the big White House conference, which was at the Sheraton in Washington, D.C. And so one of them was in Baltimore and one of them in Cleveland, the mini conferences, and this is where we met. His name is Zev Harel Mikhailiev, or Sefer Zev, and we wrote together a book about here it is, Holocaust Survivors and the State of Israel. And here we have a collection of famous people in Israel, all survivors. You see what they contributed to the State of Israel.
This is incredible. David, it's incredible.
Well, it's just one part of my life. You see. So, what can I tell you more? And then exactly in 2000, I was retired officially from the university, but I didn't, because I come even today at 7 o'clock. I was the first to open the lights here in the corridor, and I wrote since then many books about first about aging and then about logotherapy. The last 2 decades are in logotherapy. Ever since we became friends, I left the whole field of gerontology, which I was already one of the major researchers in America. This is why they gave me the White House conference, and then I transferred my academic interest and work into the theory of logotherapy and to continue Frankl's heritage.
And David, if I can ask you, what message do you give to the future generation? Because it's needed so badly.
The same message I gave them in Dachau. I said, never again. Never again let people trample the Jews because they are Jews. The young generation, they must be strong. They must be proud of their heritage. They have to defend the State of Israel by all might, and to do whatever sacrifices, like what we did, my generation, you see, in order to safeguard this as the home of the Jewish people all over the world. This is the home. And they must remember it. They must be true to the heritage, to the values of the Jewish people, to what all the generation gave to the world. You see, I came from Hungary, and we went, Michael and me, to see in one of the museums, there was an exhibit about people who received the Nobel Prize. And you know, 2/3 of them, they were Jews.
Yeah.
They must remember that they have to be proud. They have to feel that they have to serve the State of Israel as a shlichut. This is a real shlichut, because there is only one chance in history for a Jewish state. We were the fortunate ones who paid the heavy price to be really able to live through the establishment of the State of Israel, and I wouldn't like to live one more minute if the state is destroyed. And we are now in such a horrible time that we are close to a real Tisha B'Av once again, a third one.
Well, please God, common sense will prevail, and we won't. But David, I want to thank you. I am so incredibly grateful. David, there are no words. There are no words your story and your life is just unbelievable. Miracles and sacrifice and it is just amazing.
And creation, look, but I tell you what, one more story about Exodus.
Okay, and I'm just so extremely grateful to you, and you should just be well, and if you could tell us, because the Exodus is so much part of our history. It is the iconic...
Right, it is. We were here in Haifa in 2000, את זוכרת את הכנס הזה, על האקסודוס, 70 שנה, 70 years to the Exodus. There was here in Haifa a conference, or it wasn't like a conference, but it was a celebration of 70 years of the Exodus. And it was done in the museum of the Israeli Navy. We have in Haifa. And there was a replica of sort, you see, of a ship, of an illegal ship, small, of course, on which people were trying to get to Eretz Israel. And I was sitting with a group of British people, ladies mainly, who came for this occasion. And I was talking with them in English, of course. And all of a sudden, one of the ladies, she got on her knees and started kissing my hand, and I was so, I tell you, I was left without words. She said that she wants to ask forgiveness for what we did to the Jewish people, to people on the Exodus. This was a tremendously dramatic and unique event in my life. Can you imagine an old lady, and she asks to forgive the British for what they did, all the wrongs about the Exodus. So
it's unbelievable. It is something.
One person, you see, one person only. There are so many survivors, and each one has a unique story.
So David, I just want the picture that you have of the Exodus.
Yeah, okay.
And to think that you wrote the sign.
Oh yes.
And David, I have to ask you this question: when the iconic film came out of Exodus, how did you feel watching the movie?
Well, for me,
I know it
was a typical Hollywood. It was for me. It was laughable. It was very nicely done because at least it had also something about the War of Independence and love story and all the, like Hollywood. But this was not Exodus.
Well, you are the real.
Yes,
the real survivor. The real.
Yes. Oh, yes, indeed. Yes. I will never forget Ike, the captain, and the conditions you see, and the fight against the British soldiers, navies. You see, what mattered then and should matter today, the spirit. We were so much fueled up to make sure that we shall arrive to Israel to build up the land of the Jewish people. This was our belief, and we were ready and did, in fact, sacrifice everything. They offered us free citizenship in France when we arrived there. Everybody who leaves the ship immediately becomes a citizen of France. And we had a saying in Yiddish, in which they said, Loi mit einer Aleph. Loi lamed Aleph. They went from ship to ship, the three ships, you see megaphones to let people know, Loi mit einer Aleph.
No.
Nobody would live.
Wow.
Nobody would left forwards.
But your determination and your logotherapy of finding meaning in life, it's so connected. It's so connected.
Maybe this is why I became a logotherapist, because you see, I really believe that human being life is built around values. And if people have no values, then they are no different from animals. And the main values is what we used to say with Victor Frankl too, that the world can be divided to two races, the race of the decent and the others. And I say the same in every society, everyone, the decent ones and the others. And the aim is to become one of the decent ones. It's a matter of choice. Everybody can decide for himself or herself to which group he wants to belong.
Look, the German soldier that could have shot you, he chose, when he saw you smiling, he had the choice and he chose...
He chose not
to. Yeah.
Not to, you see.
Wow. David, 8 million, there are no words, and you should just have all of the blessings, all of Hashem's blessings, and I'm so grateful to you. I'm so incredibly grateful.
Thank you very much.
It's been the biggest honor and privilege. It really has.
I tell you what, I hope you will send us a copy of something.
Oh, for sure.